The sky was quiet, almost too quiet. For months, nothing seemed out of place, just another object drifting through deep space. Cold, silent, predictable. Astronomers had seen this before. A faint point of light moving along the ecliptic, following the same ancient highways carved by gravity. No sudden turns, no strange flares, no reason to worry. At first, it was just another line in a database, another catalogue number, another routine discovery logged between coffee breaks and late-night screens. The universe is full of wandering debris, rocks, ice, forgotten leftovers from the birth of stars. And this one looked no different. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Night after night, telescopes tracked it as it slid across the black. A slow, steady glide, almost polite. The kind of motion that tells scientists there is nothing new here. But the sky has a way of waiting, and sometimes it waits for us to look closer. When the first clean observation finally arrived, no alarms went off. No red warnings, no dramatic headlines, just numbers. Brightness values, position data, motion curves, the kind of data that usually feels boring, safe, reassuring, until someone paused. Not because the numbers were extreme, not because anything was broken, but because the numbers felt wrong. Not wrong enough to panic, just wrong enough to make the room go quiet. The light curve didn't behave like it should. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't noisy. It was controlled. Too controlled. For an object this far away, for something that hadn't yet touched the sun's influence. The brightness should have fluctuated gently. Instead, it held steady, almost as if it knew exactly how bright it wanted to be. Someone suggested calibration error. Someone else blamed atmospheric distortion. That happens all the time. So they checked again. Different telescope, different instruments, different night. Same result. The object moved exactly where gravity said it should, but its light refused to behave like a natural body, and that's when the discomfort crept in. Because space is violent, messy, unpredictable. Nothing stays smooth for long. Comets tumble. Asteroids spin unevenly. Dust clouds scatter light in strange ways. But this thing, it glided. Its path along the ecliptic was clean, almost elegant. And elegance in deep space is rare. As the weeks passed, more eyes turned toward it. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. No tail, no visible outgassing, no wild changes, just quiet motion and quiet data. The kind that makes scientists uneasy, even if they can't explain why. Late at night, alone with the screens, some researchers began overlaying older datasets, looking for patterns, looking for reassurance. Instead, they found consistency. Too much of it. The object wasn't reacting to its environment the way it should. Solar radiation barely touched its behavior. Cosmic background noise didn't disturb it. It was as if the universe was pressing on it, and it was pressing back. Suddenly, silently. At meetings, the tone stayed calm, professional, measured. Words like uncertain and needs further observation filled the slides. But behind those words, something else lingered. A feeling that this wasn't just another visitor, that this discovery wasn't supposed to feel like this. One astronomer joked that it was too well behaved. The room laughed, then fell silent. because everyone knew what that meant. In space, well-behaved objects are usually dead, old, broken. This one felt deliberate. Still, no one said it out loud. The universe plays tricks on us all the time, and science is built on patience, not fear. So they waited. They watched the object inch closer, frame by frame, pixel by pixel, waiting for it to misstep, waiting for chaos. But the sky refused to blink. Every new observation confirmed the same thing. Motion without noise. Light without randomness. And the strangest part? The object wasn't hiding. If anything, it seemed perfectly content being seen, as if discovery didn't bother it at all. That's when a quiet question began forming, not in journals, but in minds. If this is just a rock, why does it feel like we weren't meant to notice it this early? Why does the data feel like a door opened too soon? In science, discovery is supposed to feel exciting, triumphant. This one felt heavy, like stepping into a room and realizing the conversation stopped because you entered. The sky had been waiting, not for the object, but for us. And as it continued its calm journey toward the inner system, one truth settled in. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't in a hurry, which raised a far more unsettling thought. If it wasn't rushing, what was it waiting for? And what happens when it finally reaches the sun? The closer it moved to the sun, the more uneasy the silence became. Perihelion is where things fall apart. It's the moment every comet reveals itself. Ice cracks, gas erupts, dust explodes outward like a scream. For astronomers, perihelion is chaos by design. Heat tears objects open. Radiation strips away surfaces that have slept for billions of years. Nothing stays hidden there. Nothing stays calm. And yet, as this object drifted closer, nothing happened. No plume, no flare, no sudden spike in brightness. Just motion. Slow, measured, almost respectful. The models were clear. They always are. At this distance, solar energy should be boiling volatile material. Pressure should be building. Surface layers should be collapsing. Instead, the readings stayed flat, too flat. Thermal data showed mild warming, then stabilization, not runaway heating, not breakdown, stability. As if something was holding the line. Scientists refreshed their screens again and again, waiting for the moment when physics would finally assert itself. It never did. The object crossed invisible thresholds where other bodies lose control, where ice turns violent, where structure gives way to noise. But this one didn't scream. It whispered. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you might think nothing was happening at all. But that was the problem. Near the sun, nothing should look like nothing. Some suggested it was made of unusually dense material. Others argued for a rare composition. Metals, maybe. But even metal heats. Even stone fractures. This object behaved like heat was something to be managed, not endured. As perihelion drew closer, instruments sharpened their focus. Infrared sensors scanned for runaway thermal patterns. They didn't find them. Instead, they found balance. Temperatures rose, then leveled, then rose again, then leveled again. Not randomly, not smoothly, in steps, like a system adjusting. One scientist described it quietly, almost by accident. It's acting like it knows what's coming. The room didn't respond. because no one wanted to follow that thought all the way down. Normally, objects react to the sun. They suffer it, they survive it, or they don't. This one behaved as if perihelion was not a threat, but a phase, something anticipated, something planned for long ago. The sun blazed louder with each passing day. Solar wind intensified. Radiation pressure climbed. And still, no chaos. The object didn't vent energy violently. It didn't shed mass. It conserved, like a traveler tightening their coat before a storm. That metaphor sat uncomfortably in scientific minds, because travelers imply intent, and intent has no place in orbital mechanics. Publicly, the language remained careful. Phrases like unexpected stability and non-standard thermal response filled updates, but behind closed doors, the tone shifted. Why wasn't it rotating chaotically? Why wasn't its surface degrading unevenly? Why did every variable seem tuned? The object wasn't cooling faster than expected. It wasn't heating slower. It was hitting targets, as if it had limits it refused to cross. One analyst noticed something subtle in the data. As solar intensity increased, reflectivity shifted slightly. Not enough to alarm, just enough to matter. A darker surface absorbs heat. A lighter one reflects it. The object adjusted between the two. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough. That shouldn't happen. Not like that. Not without complex structure or design. The idea wasn't spoken openly, not yet. Instead, people leaned harder on coincidence. Rare object, unusual makeup, statistical outlier. Science has survived worse. But as perihelion approached, even coincidence began to feel thin. The sun doesn't negotiate, it burns. Yet here was something moving closer and refusing to burn the way it should. Each hour brought more data. Each dataset agreed with the last. The object wasn't panicking. It wasn't breaking. It was behaving. That word kept returning. Behaving. Not reacting. Not collapsing. Behaving. As if perihelion was a test and the object was passing it quietly. For the first time, some scientists wondered if the danger wasn't what would happen at perihelion, but what wouldn't. If nothing dramatic happened near the sun, then what exactly was this object built to endure? And more unsettling still, if it could pass so close to a star without chaos, what else could it pass through unchanged? As perihelion loomed just days away, the room felt heavier. Not because something was about to explode, but because something wasn't. The sun was ready to tear it apart. The universe was doing what it always does, and the object was waiting, prepared, controlled, as if perihelion wasn't the climax of its journey, but only the beginning. And if this was preparation, what came after? At first, it looked like a glitch, just a small hiccup in the data. The kind scientists see every day and delete without a second thought. A spike where there shouldn't be one. A pause that felt a fraction too long. Nothing dramatic. But the light curve refused to smooth out. In theory, this part is simple. As an object spins through space, its brightness rises and falls, like a slow breath, predictable, natural. Every asteroid does it. Every comet, every piece of drifting rock obeys the same quiet rule. This one didn't. Instead of a gentle wave, the curve stepped upward, stopped, then stepped again. Brightness jumped, then held, then jumped again. Not randomly, in rhythm. At first, analysts assumed rotation artifacts. Maybe the object had an odd shape, a strange tumble. That happens. So they modeled it, and the model failed. They adjusted assumptions, changed angles, altered spin rates. The curve refused to cooperate. The brightness wasn't following rotation. It wasn't following distance. It wasn't following reflection laws the way it should. It was doing its own thing. That's when someone slowed the data down, frame by frame, second by second. And suddenly, the jumps lined up. Not perfectly, not obviously, but enough to make the room quiet. The brightness increased, paused, decreased, paused, then repeated. A cycle, subtle, almost polite, like it didn't want to be noticed. In deep space, randomness is loud. Chaos announces itself. Patterns whisper. This one was whispering. They checked again. Different instruments, different wavelengths. Visible light, infrared, near ultraviolet. The rhythm was there too. Not identical across bands, but related, as if different layers were responding together. That shouldn't happen accidentally. Someone joked that it looked like a heartbeat. No one laughed, because heartbeats belong to systems. And systems imply structure. The object wasn't flashing like a beacon. It wasn't signaling outward. It was modulating itself. Brightness changed without ejecting material, without rotating into shadow. Just changing. As if the surface was adjusting reflectivity on command. That word surfaced quietly in notes. Reflectivity, not passive reflection. Active adjustment. Small shifts. Precise timing. Like dimming a light, then holding it there. The curve didn't drift. It reset, again and again. The longer they watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't noise. Noise doesn't repeat this cleanly. Noise doesn't pause. This was something else. Still, no one wanted to say the word pattern. Patterns invite dangerous questions. Patterns suggest intention, or at least design. So they leaned on caution. Unclassified anomaly. Instrument correlation. Safe words. Comforting words. But at night, when the labs were quiet, some researchers replayed the curve again. Watching the rises, the holds, the falls. It felt measured, as if the object was counting. The rhythm wasn't fast, not urgent, slow enough to feel deliberate, slow enough to feel patient. The object was still approaching perihelion. Solar influence was growing stronger, and yet the light curve didn't collapse into chaos. It stayed organized, almost disciplined. One scientist noticed something subtle. The pauses in brightness grew slightly longer as the sun grew stronger. Not shorter, not erratic. Longer, as if the object was adjusting its timing to the environment. Listening, reacting without reacting. That contradiction sat at the center of the unease. Because natural objects don't listen. They endure. This one seemed to respond, not to us, not to telescopes, to conditions, to stress, to proximity. The curve wasn't screaming for attention. It was maintaining control. Somewhere between disbelief and curiosity, a new idea formed. What if the light curve wasn't a symptom, but a behavior? What if brightness wasn't a side effect, but an output? No transmissions were detected. No radio bursts. No signals aimed outward. This wasn't communication. At least, not with us. It was internal, like a machine checking its own systems. Brightness up, check. Hold, check. Brightness down, check. Hold, repeat. The thought was uncomfortable, because machines don't drift randomly through the solar system, and yet no one could find a natural explanation that fit all the data. Every attempt left something unexplained. Every solution solved one problem and created two more. The light curve didn't match rotation, didn't match tumbling, didn't match surface fracture. It matched control, and control implies limits. The object never got too bright, never too dim. It stayed within bounds, as if crossing certain thresholds wasn't allowed. Why would an object care about thresholds? Why would it repeat behavior so carefully? The questions stacked up, and the silence grew heavier. Outside the labs, the world went on. People slept. Cities glowed. Above it all, the object continued its quiet rhythm. Blink. Hold. Blink. Not calling, not hiding, just being. And that was the most unsettling part, because if this was a pattern, then it meant the object wasn't just moving through space. It was operating within it. And if it could control light this precisely, what else could it control? The curve kept repeating, and with every repetition, the line between anomaly and pattern blurred, until one thought became impossible to ignore. If this was the first pattern we noticed, how many others were already there, waiting for us to catch up? At first, no one wanted to call it a pulse. That word carries weight. It implies rhythm. It implies intent. So they used safer language, periodic variation, repeating fluctuation, anything but pulse. But deep down, everyone saw the same thing. Across the world, observatories kept their eyes fixed on the object. Different countries, different instruments, different skies, and still the same behavior appeared. A rise in brightness, a pause, a fall, another pause, over and over again, not drifting, not fading, repeating. This wasn't one telescope misreading the sky. This wasn't a software error echoing through a system. The pulse was global. Independent teams, working in isolation, began noticing the same timing, the same spacing, the same restraint. And that's when something changed. Because when patterns survive distance, they stop being accidents. The object wasn't sending anything outward. No radio burst, no laser flash, no message aimed at the stars. The silence around it was absolute. Yet inside that silence, something was moving. Reflectivity shifted in small, precise steps. The surface didn't flare. It adjusted. Dark, light, dark again, as if the object was breathing. But not for us. If it were a signal, it would reach outward, expand, carry information away. This didn't. It stayed close, contained, an internal rhythm. That realization unsettled everyone, because internal systems don't exist without a reason. A pulse means feedback, a loop, an action followed by measurement. Brightness changed, then stabilized, then changed again, like a system checking itself. Some compared it to thermal regulation, others to stress testing. But no natural object regulates reflectivity with timing this clean. Comets vent, asteroids tumble, stars flicker. They don't pause, they don't hold states deliberately. This thing did. The more data came in, the clearer the structure became. The pulse wasn't perfectly uniform. It adapted. When solar pressure increased, the timing shifted slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to matter. Like a response, as if the object wasn't ignoring its environment, but listening to it. Still, no communication was detected. No outbound message, no greeting, no warning, which raised a question no one wanted to voice too loudly. If the pulse isn't for us, then who is it for? Some suggested it was a leftover behavior, a relic of formation. But relics decay. This didn't. It remained sharp, disciplined. Others suggested it was a reaction to stress, a material property. But materials don't repeat with memory. This had memory. The object remembered its last state and returned to it. Again and again. One researcher described it quietly during a late-night call. It feels like we're watching the inside of something, not the surface, not the motion. The inside. That thought didn't spread publicly. It stayed locked in whispers and private notes. Because once you start thinking in terms of insides, you've already crossed a line. The pulse continued as the object moved closer to the sun. Solar wind battered it. Radiation increased. The rhythm adjusted, but never broke. No panic, no runaway response, just correction. That's when the word machine appeared for the first time. Not in headlines, not in papers, in margins. In messages sent at 2 a.m. Number 1 claimed certainty. They didn't need to. The data was doing that on its own. Machines don't have to speak to be machines. They don't have to broadcast. Sometimes they just run, executing cycles designed long ago. The object wasn't saying hello. It wasn't asking for attention. It was maintaining itself. And that was far more unsettling, because maintenance implies purpose, and purpose implies origin. If this pulse was internal, then it meant the object wasn't passive. It had rules, limits, boundaries it refused to cross. Why? What happens if it does? The pulse never sped up in panic, never slowed into failure. It stayed within a narrow range, controlled, intentional. The sun didn't interrupt it. Gravity didn't disrupt it. Human observation didn't affect it either. It pulsed whether we watched or not, as if we were irrelevant. That idea landed hard. For centuries, discovery meant interaction. Comets dazzled us. Asteroids threatened us. This one ignored us. And in that indifference, something shifted. The silence stopped feeling empty. It started feeling full, like a room where someone else is present, but chooses not to speak. The pulse carried on. No message, no explanation, just repetition. And repetition changes things, because repetition turns behavior into identity. This object wasn't just doing something. This was what it did. And if this was its normal state, then the real question wasn't why it pulsed. The real question was, what would make it stop? Because if something in deep space has been pulsing silently, internally, without failure, possibly for longer than humanity has existed, then maybe the silence we're hearing now isn't the absence of a signal. Maybe it's the pause between phases, and maybe the pulse isn't meant to be heard at all. Maybe it's meant to continue until something changes, until something triggers the next step. And as the object pressed onward through the solar glare, one thought became impossible to escape. If this pulse is part of a process, then we may not be witnessing an event. We may be witnessing a system in progress. quiet, patient, waiting for a condition we don't yet understand. And if that condition isn't the sun, then what is it? And what happens when the pulse finally decides, it's time to change? The sun was supposed to break it. That's what everyone expected. At this distance, heat doesn't knock politely. It storms in. It overwhelms. It strips everything bare. Perihelion is where objects lose control. But when the thermal data came in, nothing collapsed. Instead, something far stranger appeared. A sudden drop. Cooling. Right when temperatures should have been climbing. Sensors blinked. Screens refreshed. The numbers stayed. For a brief window of time, the object cooled while moving closer to the sun. That shouldn't happen. In space, heat is relentless. There's no shade, no escape. Objects don't cool near a star, they surrender. But this one didn't. The cooling wasn't dramatic, not violent. It was controlled, measured like a deliberate step back. Then slowly, the temperature rose again. Not spiking, not running away. Rising to a limit. Stopping, holding, as if someone had drawn a line and said, not past this. Scientists stared at the graphs in silence. Cooling, then warming, then stability. No explosion of gas, no plume of dust, nothing that could explain such clean behavior. Comets cool when they vent material. They lose mass, they shed energy violently. This object shed nothing. It didn't throw heat away, it managed it. That word came back again. Managed. The thermal pattern wasn't smooth like natural conduction. It moved in phases. Step down, hold, step up, hold, just like the light curve. Different system, same rhythm. That connection tightened the knot in everyone's chest, because independent anomalies are one thing. Synchronized ones are another. The sun grew louder. Radiation pressure climbed. Solar wind lashed at the object's surface. And still, no chaos. The thermal envelope stayed intact. Not cold, not hot. Balanced, as if the object knew exactly how much heat it could tolerate and refused to accept more. One model suggested a highly reflective surface. Another proposed deep insulating layers, but none explained the cooling phase. Reflection can limit heating, but it can't pull heat out on command. Insulation slows change, but it doesn't reverse it. This wasn't passive. It was active. Something was happening beneath the surface. Not melting. Not cracking. Adjusting. The object behaved like a system under stress that had been designed for that stress, long before it ever reached our sun. Someone asked a simple question during a quiet briefing. What if this isn't its first star? No one answered, because if that were true, then this object had survived environments we could barely imagine. Stars hotter than ours, radiation stronger, gravity harsher. And it had learned. The thermal pattern repeated again. Cooling, pause. Warming, pause. Always within limits. Never panicking. The sun didn't surprise it. That was the most unsettling part. Nothing in nature expects a star. Everything reacts to it. This thing behaved like it had seen one coming for a very long time. Public explanations stayed cautious. Unusual thermal inertia, rare material composition, safe phrases. But behind them, the question sharpened. What kind of object carries its own thermal discipline? What kind of structure anticipates heat and answers it calmly. Machines do, but machines don't drift through space without purpose. They're built, sent, or abandoned. And abandoned machines decay. This one hadn't. Its thermal response was crisp, efficient, alive with feedback, not alive like a creature, alive like a system. The cooling phases didn't last long, just long enough. The warming never overshot, not once, as if failure wasn't an option and hadn't been for a very long time. Some researchers stopped thinking in terms of comets entirely. They began asking different questions. What if the object wasn't protecting itself from the sun, but preserving something inside? What if the temperature limits weren't about survival, but about integrity? Certain materials fail outside narrow ranges. Certain systems require stability. The object guarded that stability fiercely. It didn't care how bright the sun burned. It enforced its own rules. That idea changed everything. Because enforcing rules means the object isn't passive matter. It has boundaries, conditions, and something that monitors them. The sun reached out with everything it had: heat, radiation, pressure. The object responded with restraint, cooling when necessary, warming when safe, never drifting, never breaking. The universe tried to shake it. It stayed centered. And with each thermal cycle, the sense of unease deepened. Because if it could manage heat this precisely, then heat wasn't a threat, it was a variable. And if this object could treat a star like a variable, what else could it manage? Gravity, time, distance. The data didn't answer those questions. It just kept repeating the same quiet truth. This object wasn't being acted upon. It was acting. Internally, silently. The sun passed its test and didn't even know it was giving one. As the object continued forward, stabilized and intact, one thought settled in. This wasn't heat resistance. It was heat awareness. And awareness implies design. Not random, not accidental. Which led to the question no one wanted to say out loud yet. If this object can regulate itself near a star, then it wasn't built for comfort. It was built for endurance. And endurance is never created without reason. So the sun failed to break it. The thermal chaos never came. Instead, the object emerged unchanged, calm, balanced, prepared. And as it moved on, carrying its secrets deeper into the solar system, a colder thought took shape. If this is how it handles the sun, then what kind of environment would finally push it out of balance? And what would happen when it reaches that point? At some point, the numbers stopped feeling distant. They started to feel personal. Because the surface wasn't just changing anymore. It was responding. As the object moved deeper into sunlight, its skin began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once. It darkened, then slowly brightened again. At first, this seemed simple. Rotation, maybe. A rough surface turning in and out of shadow. That's normal. So they mapped it. They tracked spin rates, calculated angles, predicted timing. And once again, the math didn't line up. The brightening didn't match rotation. The darkening didn't match shadow. The surface wasn't turning away from the sun. It was changing. Reflectivity wasn't a constant anymore. It was a variable, and it moved with intent. When solar intensity increased, the surface dulled slightly, absorbing less heat. When conditions stabilized, it brightened again. releasing control, not instantly, not mechanically, smooth, measured, as if the object was feeling its way forward. Some suggested microfractures, cracks opening and closing under stress. That happens, sometimes, but fractures are messy. They spread, they worsen. This didn't. The surface never degraded, never spiraled. It adjusted, then returned to baseline, like nothing had happened. Others suggested dust redistribution, fine particles shifting across the surface. But dust doesn't move with timing this precise. It doesn't pause. It doesn't reverse course cleanly. And dust doesn't care who's watching. This did. That was the part no one wanted to focus on. The reflectivity shifts became more pronounced when observation increased, when more instruments locked on, when higher resolution scans came online. Not wildly more pronounced, just enough, as if attention itself added pressure, and the object compensated. That idea felt dangerous. Science is built on the belief that observation doesn't change reality, it reveals it. But here, revelation seemed to trigger response. The surface didn't react violently. It didn't hide. It adapted. The brightness changes weren't defensive. They were controlled, almost curious, like a system learning its environment. One researcher noticed something unsettling. During periods of intense observation, multiple telescopes, overlapping scans, the surface behavior became smoother. Less jitter, cleaner transitions, as if the object preferred consistency, as if it noticed when it was being watched and adjusted to maintain equilibrium. No one wrote that down officially, but it lingered. The idea that perception itself might be part of the interaction. That observation wasn't passive anymore. It was a variable. The object didn't reflect light randomly. It curated it, dark enough to manage heat, bright enough to remain stable. Never too much, never too little. This wasn't camouflage. It wasn't concealment. It was regulation. And regulation implies awareness, not conscious awareness, but system-level awareness. Feedback, the kind machines have. The surface layers weren't inert rock. They behaved like components, responsive, adaptive. Some began wondering if the reflectivity shifts were tied to internal states, that the surface wasn't reacting directly to sunlight, but to internal thresholds being crossed. Stress up. Surface darkens. Stress down. Surface brightens. Like a visual readout of something happening underneath. That possibility reframed everything. Because then the surface wasn't just a shell, it was an interface between inside and outside. And interfaces are built, not formed. The object continued its journey, calm and deliberate. Its surface kept adjusting, quietly rewriting expectations. Every explanation felt incomplete. Rotation explained part of it. Fractures explained another. But none explained the timing. None explained the restraint. And none explained why the object seemed most stable when it was most observed. That thought kept returning, uninvited. What if observation wasn't revealing the truth? What if it was participating in it? In physics, that idea exists, but only at tiny scales. Particles, quantum behavior, not objects this large, not things drifting between stars. And yet, the surface continued to behave as if it was in conversation with its environment, not speaking. Listening, adjusting, never overcorrecting. The object didn't mind being seen, but it didn't ignore the act of seeing either. That balance felt intentional, as if it was designed to operate under scrutiny without drawing conclusions from it. Some researchers stopped asking what the object was. They began asking what it expected. Did it expect radiation? Yes. Did it expect heat? Yes. Did it expect observation? The data didn't say no. The reflectivity patterns tightened over time. Less variation, more consistency, as if the system was settling into an optimal state. Learning, that word hovered, unspoken, because learning implies memory, and memory implies experience, which leads to a quiet, unsettling possibility. This object may have been observed before, not by us, by something else. Long ago, somewhere else. And it learned how to behave under a gaze. That idea didn't feel like science fiction anymore. It felt like inference. The surface wasn't thinking like a mind. It was thinking like a process. Input, adjustment, stability, repeat. The sun provided one kind of input. Observation provided another. The object balanced both and never lost control. As it moved onward, reflectivity shifts grew subtler, cleaner, as if the object had found a rhythm it liked or a condition it preferred. That calm, that comfort under scrutiny, it unsettled more than chaos ever could, because chaos is honest. Control hides things, and this object hid nothing while revealing just enough to remind us how little we understood. The surface kept changing, not randomly, not dramatically, thoughtfully. And the longer we watched, the more it felt like the act of watching mattered, which led to a question that lingered long after the screens went dark. What if this object isn't just moving through space? What if it's moving through observers, through systems that notice it, measure it, try to understand it? What if perception itself is part of the environment it was built to navigate? And if that's true, then the moment we noticed it wasn't just a discovery. It was an interaction. And once interaction begins, it rarely stays one-sided. The surface brightened one last time, then held steady, as if it had reached a conclusion. And somewhere in that quiet adjustment, a realization settled in. This object doesn't just exist in space. It exists in relation to heat, to light, to attention. And if it can respond to all three, then we're no longer just watching something strange move through the solar system. We're part of the system it's responding to, which raises a far more uncomfortable question. If perception affects its behavior, what happens when that perception changes? And what will it do when we stop watching? No one announced it. No headline. No press release. The word didn't arrive with confidence. It slipped in quietly, almost apologetically. Artificial. At first, it appeared only in private messages, in footnotes, in sentences that ended with question marks. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud, because once you do, everything changes. Up to now, every mystery could still hide behind nature, rare materials, strange physics, unlucky coincidences. Science is comfortable there, but the data was no longer asking small questions. It was asking a dangerous one. What if this object isn't natural, not alive, not thinking, not watching us, just built? That distinction mattered, because artificial doesn't mean intelligence. It means intention, something made for a reason. The object didn't behave like a creature. It didn't explore. It didn't adapt creatively. It followed rules, limits, boundaries, cycles, like a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, and doing it very well. The more scientists tried to force natural explanations, the more strained they became. Rotation failed, fracture failed, outgassing failed. Every model bent, then snapped. What remained was behavior that looked engineered, not flashy, not advanced in an obvious way, just efficient, quietly resilient. The object conserved energy, managed heat, adjusted reflectivity, all without waste. That's not how nature optimizes. That's how design does. Still, the word stayed buried. Because once you label something artificial, you inherit the next question. Who built it? And that question had no safe answers. The object wasn't broadcasting. No signal. No greeting. It wasn't moving with purpose through the inner system. No course correction. No approach. It simply passed through, like it had done before. And that raised another unsettling idea. Machines that wander usually have one of three stories. They are sent, they are lost, or they are abandoned. Sent machines announce themselves. They communicate. They arrive. This one didn't. Lost machines degrade. They fail. They drift aimlessly. This one didn't. Abandoned machines decay unless they were built not to, unless endurance was the point, unless silence was intentional. That silence became harder to ignore than any signal ever could, because silence is a choice. The object wasn't broken. It wasn't asleep. It was active, just not communicative. That suggested something chilling. What if it wasn't meant to talk? What if it wasn't meant to be found? What if it was meant to pass, observe conditions, and continue? A probe without curiosity, a system without conversation, just function. That idea sat heavy, because it implied origin without presence, a builder long gone, or far away, or uninterested. The object showed no markings, no geometry visible at distance, nothing cinematic, no metal glinting in the dark, just behavior. And behavior was enough. The most disturbing realization came slowly. The object didn't care where it was. It treated interstellar space and the inner solar system the same way. Adjust, stabilize, continue. That meant our system wasn't special. Not a destination. Not a target. Just another environment, another test case. If this was a machine, it wasn't here for us. And that somehow felt worse, because curiosity implies attention. Indifference implies scale. The object didn't need to hurry, didn't need to hide. It had time. Time enough to drift between stars, time enough to wait out civilizations. That kind of patience isn't biological. It's built. Some scientists pushed back hard. Calling it artificial felt like surrender, like failure. Because science is supposed to explain, not speculate. But the speculation was coming from the data itself. No one wanted aliens. They wanted equations that worked. Artificial was just the least broken explanation left, and even then, it didn't explain origin, because origin is the deepest problem of all. If something built this, when? Thousands of years ago? Millions? Before Earth had life? Before the sun existed? The object didn't age like a natural body. Its surfaces didn't erode. Its systems didn't drift. It behaved like it had been waiting longer than humanity had existed. That made the silence louder. Because if this was a machine, then silence wasn't absence. It was policy, a rule. Don't speak. Don't signal. Don't interfere. Just pass through. Record conditions. Maintain integrity. Move on. That thought reframed everything. The object wasn't lost. It wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. Which means it worked. And if this one exists, others might too, not nearby, not watching us, just out there, moving quietly, patiently. The artificial question never made it into official statements. Not because it was rejected, but because no one knew how to finish the sentence. Artificial. Created by whom? There was no answer that didn't feel premature. So the question lingered, unresolved, and maybe that was the most honest place for it. Because sometimes recognizing design doesn't mean understanding the designer. Sometimes it only means realizing you're not looking at chance anymore. The object continued its silent journey. No deviation, no acknowledgement. And as it moved on, a strange shift occurred. Fear didn't spike. Panic didn't spread. Instead, something quieter took hold. Perspective. Because if a machine could drift through our system unnoticed until now, then the universe had always been more crowded than we assumed. Not crowded with beings, but with remnants, processes, systems set in motion long before we learned how to look. The artificial question didn't answer anything, but it changed the tone of every other question. This wasn't about aliens arriving. It was about realizing that intelligence doesn't have to arrive to matter. Sometimes it just passes through, leaves no trace, says nothing, and still forces you to reconsider your place in the dark. As the object slipped farther along its path, still silent, still composed, one final thought took shape. If this is a machine, then it doesn't care if we understand it. And if it doesn't care, then understanding was never the point. Which leads to the most unsettling possibility of all. Maybe this object wasn't sent to observe us. Maybe it was sent to remind the universe that someone else was here first. And that silence is sometimes the loudest signature of design, because only something truly confident in its purpose never feels the need to explain itself. At first, the data lived in separate boxes, light curves in one folder, thermal readings in another. Reflectivity shifts logged somewhere else. Each anomaly had its own explanation, its own excuse. That's how uncertainty survives, by staying fragmented. But eventually, someone did what scientists rarely rush to do. They stacked everything together, every observation, every wavelength, every shift in brightness, heat, and timing. They layered it all and stepped back. That's when the room went quiet, because what appeared wasn't noise, it was structure. The pulses aligned, not perfectly at first glance, but close enough to matter. Light changes synced with thermal adjustments. Reflectivity shifts followed the same intervals. Different systems, same rhythm. That's when the anomaly stopped feeling isolated and started feeling coordinated. The object wasn't reacting randomly to the sun. It wasn't responding independently to stress. It was executing a sequence. One change triggered another, then another. Like steps in a process. When brightness dipped, thermal control followed. When reflectivity adjusted, stability returned. Each action had a response. Each response had a limit. Nothing spilled over. Nothing overlapped by accident. It was clean. Too clean. In nature, overlapping processes blur together. They interfere. They fight. Here, they cooperated. Someone overlaid the timelines again. Then again, aligning everything down to the second. And there it was, a repeating structure, not just repetition, but order. The object wasn't pulsing blindly. It was cycling. Phase 1, pause. Phase 2, pause. Always in the same order, always within the same boundaries. If one variable drifted, another corrected it, like a system preserving balance. That's when the language changed, not publicly, quietly. Words like behavior replaced effect. Response replaced reaction. And one word began appearing more often than anyone was comfortable with: pattern. Patterns demand explanation. And intention is the hardest explanation of all, because once you admit intention, you admit design. And once you admit design, you admit origin. The object wasn't doing new things. It was doing the same things over and over under different conditions. And it was doing them consistently, as if it had been tested before. The data showed no learning curve, no trial and error, no confusion. It responded correctly from the beginning. That suggested something deeply unsettling. This object didn't figure things out here. It arrived already knowing how to behave, which meant this wasn't its first environment, and probably not its second. The pattern didn't accelerate near perihelion. It didn't panic. It adjusted, then resumed, like a process resuming after interruption. That calm continuity changed how people looked at the timeline. This wasn't a moment. It was part of something longer, something that extended far beyond our solar system. When researchers simulated future behavior, the pattern held. When they ran it backward, it still fit. That consistency is rare. In nature, patterns decay over time. They drift, they unravel. This one didn't. It was stable across distance, heat, and observation, which meant whatever built it understood uncertainty, understood stress, understood time. The most uncomfortable realization came next. The pattern didn't optimize for speed. It didn't optimize for efficiency. It optimized for survival, for endurance, for not failing. The object wasn't trying to do more. It was trying to do exactly enough. And that kind of restraint is learned or designed. Someone pointed out something almost too subtle to notice. The pattern included delays. Intentional delays. Moments where the object could have adjusted, but waited. Why wait? Waiting introduces risk. Unless waiting is part of the process, unless timing matters more than speed, that's when the pattern stopped feeling mechanical and started feeling strategic. Not intelligent strategy, procedural strategy. A rule-based system making choices based on thresholds. If X happens, do Y. If Y stabilizes, wait, then continue. No creativity, no curiosity, just execution. That's the signature of something built to last, not to explore. The object didn't seek novelty, it resisted it. Every response pushed it back toward equilibrium. That meant one thing. The object wasn't here to change, it was here to persist. And persistence is rarely accidental. Once the pattern was visible, it couldn't be unseen. Even skeptics stopped arguing against it. They argued around it instead. Emergent behavior, complex physics, But even complex systems have variation. This didn't. It had discipline. The anomaly had matured into identity. This wasn't a strange object that happened to behave oddly. This was an object whose behavior was the point. And that's when the feeling shifted. Not fear, recognition. Because humans know patterns, we build them. We design systems that regulate themselves. We create machines that monitor thresholds and adjust quietly. Not to impress, but to endure. Looking at the data felt like looking into a mirror, distorted by scale and time. The object wasn't alive, but it behaved like something that had been planned. Planned for environments, planned for uncertainty, planned for ignorance. It didn't need to be understood. It just needed to keep going. The pattern beneath the data didn't answer the biggest question. It sharpened it. If this is intentional, then intention existed long before discovery, long before observation, long before us. And intention implies origin, not where it came from physically, but why it was made in the first place. That question hovered, unanswered, because nothing in the pattern pointed toward communication. Nothing pointed towards curiosity. Nothing pointed toward us, which made the pattern feel colder and more honest. This object didn't care if it was seen. It didn't care if it was understood. It would continue whether we noticed it or not. And that indifference felt intentional too. As the layers of data settled into a single structure, one truth became unavoidable. This wasn't randomness aligning by chance. This was coordination revealing itself over time. The kind of coordination that only appears when you stop looking at moments and start looking at processes. The anomaly didn't disappear under scrutiny. It deepened. And with it came a final, unsettling thought. If this pattern is intentional, then we are not witnessing something that happened. We are witnessing something that is happening, something ongoing, something designed to operate beyond any single observation. And if that's true, then the most important part of the pattern may not be what we've already seen. It may be what hasn't happened yet. Because patterns don't exist to repeat forever. They exist to lead somewhere. And whatever this pattern leads to, it hasn't revealed itself yet. Which leaves one question hanging in the dark. If this object is following a process, what is the next step? And when the pattern finally reaches it, will we recognize it in time? At first, the change was subtle. You could hear it in the words. Papers that once sounded confident began to soften. Certainty gave way to caution. Strong claims became careful suggestions. Nothing was retracted. Nothing was denied, but conclusions were delayed. Press releases took longer to appear. Statements grew shorter. Language became strangely neutral, not because the data was unclear, but because it was too clear in the wrong direction. Inside public documents, everything looked calm, professional, controlled, but behind closed doors, the tone was different. Screens filled dark rooms, graphs hovered in silence. People leaned back in their chairs and stared longer than usual, not at what the data showed, but at what it implied. Disbelief is loud at first. It argues. It demands errors. That phase passed quickly. What came next was quieter. Caution. No one wanted to be wrong in public. No one wanted to overreach. But more than that, no one wanted to underestimate what they were looking at. Meetings that once focused on explanations shifted toward implications. What if we're missing something? What if this isn't behaving for us? What if this isn't passive? Those questions didn't appear in minutes or reports. They floated between sentences, lingered after meetings ended. People stopped joking, because jokes are how humans release fear, and fear had begun to feel inappropriate. This wasn't a threat, at least not in any obvious way. The object wasn't approaching Earth. It wasn't emitting energy. It wasn't changing course. It didn't care. And that indifference changed everything. We are used to the universe reacting to us, or ignoring us completely. This felt different. It felt like we were being acknowledged without being addressed, as if our presence was noted but not important. That realization settled slowly, because it forces a question humans don't like to ask. Are we observing this object, or are we part of its environment? In closed rooms, some researchers began to speak more carefully. Not about aliens, not about intelligence. About exposure. What happens when a system encounters a new variable? It measures, it adjusts, it continues. That's exactly what the object had been doing, adjusting to heat, to radiation, to proximity, and now to attention. Observation isn't neutral. It never has been. Telescopes pour energy toward their targets. Lasers bounce signals. Sensors listen and illuminate. From the object's perspective, something changed. The environment grew brighter, busier, more focused, and the object responded. Not dramatically, but precisely. That response unsettled people more than any signal could have, because it suggested feedback. And feedback suggests interaction, even if it's one-sided. In internal discussions, someone asked a question that stopped the room. What if observation is the test? No one answered immediately, because tests don't require intent toward the tester. They only require conditions. If a system was built to move through environments, then new environments matter. Stars matter. Radiation matters. And observers might matter too. That idea didn't feel like science fiction. It felt like systems engineering. What happens when you introduce a variable into a closed loop? You watch what changes. The object didn't respond to curiosity. It didn't respond to emotion. It responded to pressure, light, heat, attention. Each time, it stayed within limits. That restraint began to feel deliberate, not defensive, evaluative. And that's when disbelief fully gave way to caution. Because caution is what comes next when you realize something might be robust, and you don't know its thresholds. No want to provoke anything, not intentionally. Data collection continued, of course, but protocols tightened, redundancies increased, some instruments pulled back slightly. Not out of fear, but respect. An unspoken rule emerged. Don't poke too hard. That alone was telling. Humanity has never hesitated to poke the universe. We send signals into the dark. We fire probes at planets. We listened loudly. This time, we listened quietly. Because for the first time, there was a sense, faint but persistent, that we weren't the only ones capable of noticing change. The object didn't accelerate, didn't turn, it didn't acknowledge us. But it didn't ignore us either. Its behavior remained consistent, yet subtly responsive, as if it was saying nothing, while taking everything into account. That balance created tension, because tension isn't born from danger alone. It's born from uncertainty. If this object were dangerous, we'd know what to do. If it were alive, we'd know how to think about it. But a silent, durable system that adjusts without communicating, that sits outside our instincts. Some scientists grew uneasy not because of what the object might do, but because of what it had already done. It had changed the tone of science itself. People spoke less, listened more. They chose words carefully, because once you admit that an object may not be passive, you have to consider your own role in the interaction. Are we explorers or stimuli? That question hung heavy. The object continued its path, indifferent to our debates. It didn't care if we argued, didn't care if we doubted. It kept operating. That consistency made the human reaction even more revealing. We slowed down, we hesitated, we treated silence as information. That's not how humanity usually behaves. We rush, we announce, we claim discovery. This time, we waited, because deep down, many felt the same thing. This wasn't a moment to be loud. Not yet. The object wasn't threatening us, but it was redefining us. It forced us to ask a question we'd never seriously considered. What if the universe doesn't just contain things to be discovered? What if it contains systems that notice when discovery happens? Not respond emotionally, not react aggressively. Just register and continue. The idea that we might be one variable among many, not special, not central, just another condition. That idea doesn't inspire panic. It inspires humility, and humility is rare in moments of discovery. As the object moved on, calm and unchanged, the reaction among humans settled into something new. Not fear, not excitement, awareness. An awareness that this encounter wasn't about contact. It was about perspective. Whether we were observing an object or being tested by one may not even be the right question. Because tests don't need intention, they only need consistency. And whatever this object was, it was very consistent, which left one quiet thought echoing through those closed rooms. If this was a test, then we didn't know the rules. We didn't know the passing conditions, and we didn't know what failure would look like. But the test was already underway, and the most unsettling part, we might never know when it ends. Because the object never told us we were part of it. It never had to. It just kept moving. And in that motion, it left us changed. More careful, more quiet. Looking at the sky not as something to conquer, but as something that might already be watching us back. Not with eyes. Not with intent, but with systems older, calmer, and far more patient than we ever imagined. And as the object slipped farther away, still silent, still composed, one thought lingered. If this is how we react to being noticed, what does that say about us? And what would happen if one day the silence decided to respond? Nothing happens. That's the strangest part. The object doesn't slow down, doesn't turn, doesn't acknowledge us in any way we can measure. No signal, no deviation, no reply. It keeps moving, exactly as it always has. And yet, something shifts. Not in space, in us. For generations, we looked at the sky as a place of events, explosions, collisions, births and deaths of stars. The universe was loud, dramatic, always doing something. This object does nothing. And somehow, that does more than any supernova ever could. Because once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Not the object itself, the idea it introduces. That space may not just be full of things, but of processes. Quiet ones. Long ones. Systems that don't care about spectacle. Systems that don't need to announce themselves. The object passes through our solar system like a thought passing through a mind, uninvited, unhurried, unconcerned. And when it does, it leaves the mind changed. Astronomers keep watching, of course. That's what they do. But the way they watch changes. They don't expect fireworks anymore. They don't wait for impact. They wait for absence. For what doesn't happen? Because sometimes absence is the signal. The object doesn't speak, but it forces a conversation. Not with it, with ourselves. Late at night, staring at the sky, people begin asking quieter questions. How many things like this have already passed through? How many came before we had the tools to notice? How many are moving right now, unnoticed because we aren't looking the right way? The sky doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels layered. Like a place where different timelines overlap. Fast ones we can see, slow ones we can't. Civilizations think in decades. Stars think in millions of years. But this object thinks in something else entirely. It doesn't rush. It doesn't linger. It just persists. And that persistence changes perspective. For the first time, some scientists stop asking, "What will it do?" and start asking, "What does it mean that it doesn't?" Because silence at this scale isn't ignorance, it's confidence. The object doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need our attention. It doesn't even need us to exist. That realization lands softly and then spreads. Human history is built on reactions. We respond to threats, to opportunities, to discoveries. This time, there is nothing to respond to, just presence, just passage. And that forces a new role on us. Observer, not conqueror, not explorer. Witness, we're used to being the ones who change things. Now we're faced with something that changes us, without lifting a finger. The object doesn't challenge our technology. It challenges our assumptions that the universe is either dead matter or active intelligence. This is neither. It's something in between. A reminder that complexity doesn't always announce itself, that design doesn't always seek recognition, that intention doesn't always include us. And once that idea settles in, the sky feels different. Not hostile, not friendly, just older, wider, more patient than we ever imagined. Telescopes still scan, data still flows. But the excitement feels different now, quieter, more careful, as if humanity has learned, without being told, that some doors aren't meant to be kicked open. Some are simply pass by. The object continues on its path, unchanged, but it leaves behind a question that refuses to fade. If nothing happens next, why does it feel like something already has? Maybe because discovery isn't always about what you find. Sometimes it's about what you stop assuming. We assumed the universe would speak if it mattered. We assumed intelligence would announce itself. We assumed silence meant emptiness. This object breaks all three assumptions without breaking a single law of physics. And that's why it lingers in the mind, not as a mystery to solve, but as a lens, a new way of seeing. The sky is no longer just a stage for dramatic events. It's a corridor. Things pass through. Some leave traces, some don't. Some are meant to be noticed. Some aren't. And the most unsettling thought of all, some don't care either way. The object doesn't change direction. But we do. We start looking for patterns instead of explosions, processes instead of moments. We start wondering not just what is out there, but how long it's been there, and whether it ever needed us to notice. That's the awakening. Not contact. Not confirmation. Awareness. The awareness that the universe may be filled with quiet systems operating on timescales we barely comprehend. Systems that don't interrupt our lives, but frame them. The object fades gradually from view. Not dramatically, just farther away each night, and with every step it takes into the dark, something settles into place. We didn't meet something new. We noticed something old, something that had always been possible. We just weren't ready to see it. Now we are, and that changes how the sky feels when we look up. It's no longer just a place where things happen. It's a place where things continue, whether we're watching or not. And that leaves one final, quiet question hanging in the air. If the universe contains systems that don't need our attention, what else have we missed? Simply because it never asked to be seen. And more importantly, now that we are awake, will we ever be able to look at the sky the same way again? It leaves the same way it arrived, quietly, no flare, no farewell. No final surge of data to hold on to, just distance. Night after night, the object grows fainter. Its brightness thins into the dark. Its patterns stretch, then dissolve into the limits of our instruments. The pulse slows, or maybe we just lose the ability to hear it. The light curve flattens. Thermal readings return to background noise. One by one, the anomalies slip back into silence, and that's when the unease truly begins. Because silence after contact feels different than silence before. Before, the sky felt empty. Now, it feels like something has passed through it. As the object exits the inner system, scientists wait for closure, a final confirmation, a decisive explanation. It never comes. Instead, the data refuses to settle. Old readings don't quite fit anymore. Models that once felt solid now feel provisional, as if they were built for a universe that no longer fully exists. People run the numbers again, recheck assumptions, revisit earlier frames. Nothing breaks, but nothing resolves either. The object didn't leave behind debris, didn't alter orbits, didn't announce its purpose. It left questions, and questions are heavier than evidence. In public, the story fades quickly. News cycles move on. Headlines soften. Attention drifts elsewhere. Another mystery filed under unexplained. Another footnote in the endless catalogue of space. But for those who watched closely, the passage doesn't end, because the object didn't just move through space, it moved through certainty. Late at night, long after the last observation window closes, some scientists find themselves staring at old plots, not looking for mistakes, looking for reassurance that this was just another strange rock, another rare coincidence. But the data doesn't offer comfort. It just sits there, calm, consistent, unwilling to confess to randomness. The object is gone, but its behavior lingers, like a shadow burned into the mind. No one can say for sure what it was. That's the honest answer. Not natural enough to explain easily, not artificial enough to prove, balanced in a space where labels fail. And that ambiguity is the hardest thing to live with. Humanity prefers answers, even frightening ones, because answers end stories. This doesn't. It opens something quieter, and far more enduring. The realization that discovery doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it arrives with restraint, with things that pass through, do what they came to do, and leave us to argue about meaning. The object never changed course, never responded, never acknowledged us. And yet, it feels wrong to say nothing happened, because something did. The way we look at the sky has shifted, suddenly, permanently. We no longer assume silence means emptiness. We no longer assume lack of signal means lack of purpose. We've seen something operate without speaking, persist without interacting, exist without caring whether it was understood. And that idea changes the weight of the universe. The sky feels less like a stage now, and more like a passageway. Things come through, things go. Some leave marks, some don't. Some notice us, some don't need to. As the object fades beyond reliable tracking, a final question takes hold. Was this a discovery? Or was it a glimpse into a larger process we barely touched? Because discoveries usually point inward. They teach us something specific. This taught us something broader, that we may not be the only observers in the universe. Not observers with eyes or minds, but observers with systems, processes that register environments, that pass through stars, radiation, gravity, the way ships pass through oceans. Not looking for life, not looking for contact, just moving. And if that's true, then this object may not have been special. It may have been ordinary, one of many. That thought settles slowly and uncomfortably, because it means the universe may be full of things that don't announce themselves, things that don't care if they're named, things that have been moving for longer than memory and will continue long after. The data ends, the charts close, the sky returns to normal. But the feeling doesn't. A quiet awareness remains that we were part of something without being the focus of it, that we observed and were also observed in a way we may never understand, not watched, registered, not studied, encountered. The object didn't stay. It didn't need to. Whatever it was built to do, it did. And it moved on, leaving us with the only thing it ever truly gave us: perspective. Perspective that the universe may not revolve around moments, but around continuities, not around events, but around endurance. And that our place in it may be smaller and more meaningful than we ever assumed. So was this a discovery? Maybe. Or maybe it was the beginning of a longer observation, not of the object, but of us. How we react to silence, how we handle uncertainty, how we live with questions that don't want answers. The object is gone, but the sky isn't the same, and neither are we, because now, when we look up, we don't just wonder what's out there. We wonder what's passing through, what has already passed through, and what might be watching, not with intent or curiosity, but with systems older than fear, older than language, older than us. And maybe that's the final truth it left behind, that the universe doesn't need to speak to change us. Sometimes it only needs to pass by.